The Legend of the Unmovable Sword. The twin suns of planet Sci-Fi cast a golden glow over the ancient ruins. The air was thick with dust, and the ground trembled slightly beneath the weight of thousands of spectators. They had gathered from across the galaxy, all for one reason: to witness the final attempt to lift the unmovable sword. The sword stood in the heart of the ruins, its black blade buried deep in stone, untouched for thousands of years. Legends said it was left behind by the ancient gods, a weapon of unimaginable power. Every great warrior, every ruler, every powerful being in the galaxy had tried to lift it. None had succeeded. The Drakari, the ruling species of Sci-Fi, guarded the sword like a sacred relic. Their high priest, a towering creature with scales as black as night, stood before the crowd. His voice boomed through the ruins. Today is the final trial. If no warrior can lift the sword, the ruins will be sealed forever. The crowd murmured. Hundreds of warriors had already tried and failed. Some had used brute strength, others had tried advanced technology, and some even attempted mind control. But the sword never moved. One by one, mighty alien champions stepped forward. A giant from the Roth Empire, covered in red armor, clenched his massive fists and pulled. Nothing. A psychic from the Zenari Federation placed both hands on the hilt, his eyes glowing with power. The sword did not even tremble. Even a cyborg, built for war, used its mechanical arms to try and pull the weapon free. The metal groaned, gears twisted, but the sword remained unmoved. The Drakari priest smirked. It is as we believed. No one is worthy. Then, a new challenger stepped forward. A murmur spread through the crowd. It was a human. The aliens whispered among themselves. Humans were considered weak, unimportant in the grand scale of the universe. They had no psychic abilities, no great physical strength, and no advanced technology compared to other species. Why would a human even try? The man's name was James Carter. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a king. He wasn't even supposed to be here. He was an explorer, a man who traveled from planet to planet, searching for forgotten history. James looked at the sword. It was massive, ancient, and powerful. He didn't know why, but something called to him. Ignoring the laughter and whispers around him, James stepped forward. The Drakari priest glared at him. This is not for humans. Leave. James smiled. Let me try. The priest hesitated. He saw no harm in allowing a weak human to fail like the others. It would only prove the superiority of the Drakari. He nodded. James took a deep breath and reached for the hilt. The moment his fingers touched the cold metal, something changed. The sword vibrated. The ruins trembled beneath him. The crowd fell silent. For thousands of years, the sword had never reacted to anyone. But now it was glowing faintly beneath James's grip. James gasped. A voice, deep, ancient, and powerful, whispered in his mind. Are you worthy? His heart pounded. Was he hearing things? Was it just his imagination? The Drakari priest's eyes widened. What trick is this? James tightened his grip and pulled. For the first time in history, the sword moved. It was only a slight shift, barely noticeable, but it moved. A wave of energy exploded from the sword, knocking James back. The ruins shook violently, sending cracks through the stone floor. The crowd panicked. Aliens backed away. Some fell to their knees in shock. Others grabbed their weapons, terrified. The Drakari priest's expression turned from disbelief to rage. Stop him, he roared. The guards rushed forward, their energy weapons aimed at James. James groaned, pushing himself up from the ground. His hands still tingled from touching the sword. He didn't know what had happened, but one thing was clear: the sword had chosen him. But the Drakari would never allow it. As the soldiers closed in, James realized he had just made himself the most wanted man in the galaxy. And this was just the beginning. The impossible movement. James Carter lay on the ground, his hands trembling. The energy that surged from the sword had left his body tingling, like an electric current running through his veins. He gasped for air, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The crowd had gone silent. Thousands of aliens, warriors, scholars, nobles, stared at him in stunned disbelief. The unmovable sword had moved. Not much, just a fraction. But that fraction was more than anyone else in the history of the galaxy had ever achieved. The Drakari High Priest, still frozen in shock, suddenly snapped back to reality. His eyes burned with fury as he pointed a clawed finger at James. "Seize him. Now." The Drakari warriors, heavily armed and wearing battle armor, rushed toward James. James' instincts screamed at him to move. He pushed himself up, his heart pounding, but his legs were still shaky. The energy from the sword had done something to him, something he didn't understand yet. The warriors surrounded him within seconds, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. "Wait," a voice cried out. A figure stepped forward from the crowd, a woman, tall and cloaked, with glowing violet eyes. Lyra. She wasn't Drakari. She wasn't even from a warrior species. Lyra was an Arcanian, a race known for their knowledge, not their strength. A historian, a seeker of lost truths. She moved past the warriors and knelt beside James. "You moved the sword," she whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. James nodded, still breathing heavily. "Yeah, and now they want to kill me for it." Lyra ignored the guards and turned to the high priest. "You saw it," she said. The sword moved. It reacted to him. "This has never happened before. Doesn't this prove that he might be the chosen one?" The high priest's face twisted in anger. A human. He spat the word like it was filth. Impossible. The gods would never choose a weak, insignificant species. James gritted his teeth. He was used to humans being underestimated in the galaxy. The larger, stronger, more advanced species always looked down on Earth and its people. But now, the sword had proven that humans weren't as weak as everyone believed. One of the Drakari warriors grabbed James by the arm, yanking him up. "It does not matter," the warrior growled. "He will die before he touches the sword again." The high priest nodded. "Yes, the sword is sacred. His existence is an insult. Take him to the execution chamber." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some cheered, those who despised humans, who thought James had cheated. Others whispered among themselves, uncertain. And then there were those like Lyra, who saw the truth. James struggled as the warriors dragged him away, their grips like iron. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had come to Sci-Fi looking for history, not for a death sentence. As they forced him toward a dark passage leading underground, Lyra's voice rang out again. "You're making a mistake." The high priest turned to her. "Silence, historian." But she wasn't done. The sword reacted to him. "That means he is connected to it. If you kill him, you might destroy whatever chance you have of unlocking its power." The priest hesitated. The Drakari had spent thousands of years obsessing over the sword. It was the key to their destiny. And yet, they had never been able to lift it. But now this human had caused it to move. A sliver of doubt crossed the priest's face. He turned back to James. "Tell me, human, how did you do it? Some kind of trick? Technology?" James clenched his jaw. "I don't know." The priest's eyes darkened. He didn't believe him. "Take him." The guards tightened their grip. James knew he had seconds before he was dragged into the underground prisons. He had to think. Fast. Then he felt it again. A whisper. Soft, ancient, inside his mind. "Come back to me." James stiffened. He turned his head, his eyes locking on the sword still embedded in the stone. The air around it shimmered, almost as if it were waiting, calling him. Before he even knew what he was doing, he acted. With all his strength, James suddenly yanked his arm free from one of the guards, twisting around and slamming his elbow into another. The warriors were fast. But James was faster. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he broke into a run, straight for the sword. The crowd screamed in shock. "Stop him!" the high priest roared. Guards lunged for him. James dodged, sliding across the cracked stone floor, his fingers reaching. The moment his hand touched the hilt, the ruins exploded with light. A shockwave of energy burst outward, throwing everyone back. Warriors, nobles, even the high priest himself, all were knocked to the ground. James gasped. His body felt like it was on fire, but not with pain. With power. The sword glowed brilliantly, humming in his grip. The air around him rippled. The ruins shook. The stones beneath him cracked. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went still. James opened his eyes, breathing hard. The sword was still in the stone, but now it felt different, lighter, like it was waiting for him. Then a new voice rang out, not from inside his head this time. "Impossible." James turned. The high priest had risen to his feet, his face twisted in rage and fear. The crowd was stunned. For the first time in history, the sword had chosen someone. And that someone was a human. James slowly tightened his grip on the hilt, realization dawning on him. This wasn't just an ancient weapon. It wasn't just a legend. This was a key to something far greater than he could imagine. And the galaxy had just changed forever. The betrayal and the chase. The ruins stood in eerie silence. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the golden light of Sci-Fi's twin suns. Every being present, warriors, nobles, spectators, stared at the human who had done the impossible. James Carter still had one hand gripping the unmovable sword, though it remained buried in the stone. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. His entire body felt strange, charged with unseen energy, like he had touched something beyond reality itself. The Drakari high priest, standing among the scattered bodies of his own warriors, trembled with rage. His black-scaled hands clenched into fists. "No," his voice was a snarl. "This is blasphemy. This is a lie." James took a slow, careful breath. "I didn't lie." The priest's nostrils flared. "Then how did you do it?" James didn't know. He had barely touched the sword, and yet it had reacted to him, spoken to him. It had unleashed an energy so powerful that it had thrown armored warriors off their feet. But why? Why a human? Before James could say another word, the high priest's expression changed. His fear was gone. His rage had turned into something else. Cold calculation. And then he smiled. "Kill him." The words were barely spoken before James saw blades flash. The Drakari warriors moved as one, lunging toward him with weapons drawn, energy blades crackling, spears aimed at his heart. James' instincts kicked in. Move. He twisted away just in time as a spear slammed into the ground where he had been standing. Sparks flew. He barely had time to think before another warrior swung at him. He ducked, the blade slicing inches over his head. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some aliens cheered for his execution. Others cried out in protest. But no one dared intervene. James was alone. His feet pounded against the stone floor as he ran. He dodged another spear, then another. He had no weapons, no plan. His only advantage was speed. But he was trapped. The ruins were a dead end, a sacred temple surrounded by cliffs and alien soldiers. There was nowhere to go, unless a voice suddenly shouted from the crowd, "This way." James turned, spotting a figure sprinting toward an ancient passageway on the side of the ruins. Lyra. The Arcanian historian waved frantically, her violet eyes flashing with urgency. James didn't hesitate. He bolted toward her, his lungs burning. The warriors roared behind him, their heavy footsteps pounding against the stone as they chased him. He was seconds from being caught. A spear came flying toward him. James barely saw it coming. He ducked, felt the heat of the energy crackle over his head. Lyra reached the entrance and slammed her hand against a control panel. The ground trembled. The ancient stone door rumbled open, revealing a dark tunnel beneath the ruins. James dived inside just as Lyra hit the panel again. The door slammed shut behind them. For a second, there was only silence. Then, furious banging from the other side. The Drakari were trying to break through. James rolled onto his back, gasping for air. Lyra knelt beside him, her breath ragged. That, she said, panting, was stupid. James let out a weak laugh. Yeah, tell me something I don't know. She held out a hand. He grabbed it, pulling himself up. The tunnel was ancient, its walls covered in glowing symbols that pulsed with a strange blue light. James recognized them instantly. They were human. Or at least, they looked human. His stomach twisted. Why were human symbols inside an alien temple? Lyra noticed his expression. She followed his gaze to the walls. She hesitated. Then she whispered, "I need to show you something." James narrowed his eyes. "Show me what?" She didn't answer. She just started walking. James followed. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading deeper underground. The pounding from the Drakari warriors above grew distant. Finally, they entered a chamber hidden beneath the ruins. James' breath caught in his throat. The room was massive, the ceiling stretching high above them, covered in more glowing symbols. And at the center of the room stood a holographic projection. It was ancient, flickering with age, but there was no mistaking what it showed. Humans. Not like James. Not weak, not forgotten. These humans were giants in shining armor, holding weapons that glowed like stars. They stood on a battlefield, fighting against massive shadowy figures. Creatures with burning red eyes, their bodies wreathed in darkness. James took a step closer. His fingers trembled as he reached out to touch the hologram. It shifted. New images appeared. A fleet of warships, built with technology beyond anything in the galaxy. Weapons that could tear planets apart. A great war. And then, destruction. James watched in horror as the holographic projection showed something terrifying. The fall of humanity. Their worlds burned. Their warriors fell. Their warships vanished into the void. And then, the final image appeared. A single sword, driven into the heart of a ruined battlefield. The same sword James had just touched. The projection flickered. Then it died, the room plunging into silence. James turned to Lyra, his voice hoarse. "What is this?" She met his gaze, her expression grave. "The lost history of your people." James' mind raced. This couldn't be true. Humanity was nothing special. Earth was a backwater world, barely noticed by the larger galaxy. But this was something else. The unmovable sword wasn't Drakari. It was human. And for the first time in history, a human had returned to claim it. Lyra spoke again, her voice low. "The war never ended, James. It just paused. And I think you just woke it up." James clenched his fists, his pulse hammering. If that was true, then something was coming. And he wasn't sure if the galaxy was ready. The lost history of humanity. The underground chamber was silent. Dust floated in the dim blue glow of the ancient symbols carved into the walls. James Carter stood frozen, staring at the holographic projection that had just faded. His mind reeled. What he had just seen, it couldn't be real. Humanity, his people, had once been powerful, not just part of the galactic stage, but dominant. Warriors, kings, conquerors. They had stood at the peak of civilization, wielding weapons and technology far beyond anything that existed today. And then, they vanished. Destroyed. Erased. The last image burned in his mind. The unmovable sword, buried in the ruins of a battlefield. Waiting. James turned to Lyra, his voice unsteady. "Tell me everything you know." The Arcanian historian studied him for a moment, her violet eyes unreadable. Then she took a slow breath. What I just showed you is forbidden knowledge. James frowned. Forbidden? She nodded. The Drakari don't just worship the sword, they control history. They erased what really happened. James felt a chill run down his spine. Why? Lyra hesitated, glancing at the ancient walls around them. Symbols pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. Because they fear the truth. James stepped closer. What truth? Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. That this galaxy used to belong to your kind. James' breath caught in his throat. That's impossible, he said. Humans aren't anything special. We only made first contact with the larger galaxy 100 years ago. We're just. Lyra cut him off. 100 years. No, James. Try 100,000. Silence. James shook his head. That doesn't make sense. If humans were that advanced, where's the proof? Where's our empire? Our fleets? Lyra's jaw tightened. Gone. Wiped from existence. But the sword remained. And so did you. James exhaled sharply. He tried to process it, but it was too much. It didn't fit with everything he knew about Earth, about history, about humanity. But then again, the sword had moved. It had spoken to him. If everything Lyra said was a lie, then why did he feel something awaken inside him the moment he touched it? Lyra stepped forward, her expression serious. Listen to me, James. The unmovable sword is more than a weapon. It's a key. James narrowed his eyes. A key to what? She hesitated. Then she raised her hand and pressed it against one of the glowing symbols on the wall. A low hum filled the chamber. The ground shifted. James stumbled back as the wall in front of him began to open. The stone slid apart with a deep, grinding sound, revealing another hidden room. James' pulse quickened. He stepped inside, his boots crunching against the dusty floor. And then he saw it. His breath caught in his throat. In the center of the hidden chamber stood a massive stone tablet covered in golden etchings. The writing was ancient, but somehow James could read it. The words burned in his mind, as if he had always known them. The last trial of humanity. James swallowed hard. His fingers traced the carved letters. Beneath the title, more words appeared. The enemy came from beyond the void. We fought. We fell. But we left behind a warrior, a guardian, the final hope. Only one of our blood may wield the blade. Only one of our kind may awaken the fleet. The war is not over. It only sleeps. James stepped back, his heart hammering. Lyra watched him carefully. Now you understand. James looked at her. The sword is connected to something bigger. She nodded. The last weapons of your people. The last fleet. The final chance to finish the war that destroyed your civilization. James rubbed his face. This was insane. He was an explorer, not a warrior. He wasn't some chosen one. And yet, the sword had moved. It had chosen him. And if what Lyra said was true, then the war that wiped out his people was still unfinished. A shiver ran down his spine. Who were they fighting? He asked quietly. Lyra's face darkened. We don't know their true name. Most records call them the Devourers. James frowned. That sounds dramatic. Lyra didn't smile. They weren't like the Drakari. They weren't like anything in this galaxy. They didn't conquer. They didn't rule. She met his gaze. They erased. James felt his stomach twist. So they didn't just destroy humanity. They erased all evidence we ever existed. Lyra nodded. And now, James, you've woken something up. The sword moved. That means the war might not be over after all. James clenched his fists. He wanted to argue, to say this was impossible. But deep down, he felt it. Something was coming. Something big. Before he could say anything else, a sudden loud explosion rocked the tunnels. The walls shook violently, dust raining down from above. James spun toward Lyra. What the hell was that? Her face paled. They found us. A second explosion echoed through the underground chamber. The stone walls cracked. Then, the muffled voice of the Drakari high priest rang through the tunnels. Burn them out. James' blood ran cold. The Drakari weren't going to arrest him anymore. They were going to kill him. Lyra grabbed his arm. We have to move. Now. James nodded. His body was still aching, his mind overwhelmed. But there was no time to think. They had to run. Because if the Drakari got their hands on him now, the truth about humanity would never be known. And the war would stay forgotten. Until it was too late. The final attempt and the ultimate test. The underground chamber shook violently. Dust and debris rained from the cracked stone ceiling. The muffled voices of Drakari warriors echoed through the tunnels, their footsteps growing closer. James Carter's pulse pounded in his ears. His mind raced. They were out of time. Lyra grabbed his arm. We have to move, now. Another explosion rocked the chamber. The shockwave sent cracks slithering across the walls like a spider's web. James turned to the massive stone tablet, the final record of humanity's lost history. The golden etchings still glowed faintly. The words echoed in his mind. Only one of our blood may wield the blade. His hands clenched into fists. For his entire life, humans had been treated as nothing special in this galaxy. They were weak, unimportant, forgotten. But now he knew the truth. Humanity had been powerful once. And now, the last remnants of that power were calling him. Boom! The tunnel entrance exploded outward. A wave of fire and debris surged forward. James and Lyra dove aside as massive Drakari warriors stormed into the chamber. Their energy weapons glowed a deep, deadly red. The high priest himself entered last, his scaled face twisted into a snarl. There will be no escape, he growled. His soldiers raised their weapons. Lyra whispered, James, we're trapped. James' mind whirled. He looked at the tablet, then back at the Drakari army blocking their only exit. There was only one option left. He turned toward the unmovable sword. It was still embedded in the stone above, waiting, testing him. The last relic of his people, the key to everything. James took a deep breath. This was it. He turned to Lyra. If I fail, run. Her eyes widened. What? What are you? James took off running. The Drakari soldiers reacted instantly. Kill him, the high priest roared. Blaster fire lit up the chamber. James dodged left, then right, sprinting faster than he ever had before. A spear whizzed past his head. Another energy shot slammed into the ground at his feet, 5 feet from the sword. A Drakari warrior leaped in front of him, raising a massive war axe. James didn't stop. At the last second, he dove forward, sliding beneath the warrior's legs. 3 feet. Another soldier swung at him. James ducked, barely avoiding the energy blade as it sliced through the air. 1 foot. James lunged forward. His hand closed around the hilt. And then, everything stopped. A deafening silence filled the chamber. James' entire body froze. For a fraction of a second, he felt weightless, as if the world itself had vanished. Then something deep inside him awoke. A whisper filled his mind. You have come back to me. The stone beneath him shattered. A shockwave of golden energy erupted from the sword, expanding outward like an explosion. The Drakari warriors were thrown backward, slamming into the walls. Even the high priest stumbled, his face frozen in shock. The chamber rumbled violently. James tightened his grip. His knuckles went white. The sword was still heavy, its ancient weight pressing down on him like 1,000 lifetimes of history. But now, it was moving. The stone around the blade cracked apart, glowing veins of golden energy spreading through the ruins. The hilt pulsed in his hands. James felt memories flood his mind. Flashes of ancient warriors standing before him, wielding the same weapon. Battles fought in the darkness, A war against something beyond the stars. And then, the final words. Finish what we could not. James let out a deep breath. I will. Then, with every ounce of strength in his body, he pulled. The sword slid free. The chamber erupted with golden light. The ruins shook apart. Massive stone pillars collapsed, sending boulders crashing to the ground. Energy pulsed through the air, sending a rippling shockwave across the entire planet. The Drakari army scrambled backward, eyes filled with terror. James slowly turned toward them. The unmovable sword now rested in his hands. But it was no longer just a weapon. It was alive, awake. And so was he. The high priest fell to his knees, his face drained of color. This cannot be. His voice trembled. A human. James took a step forward. The sword hummed with energy, golden fire dancing along its edge. James met the high priest's gaze. His voice was calm, steady. I think it's time humanity stopped being forgotten. A high priest staggered back. Lyra stood beside James now, her eyes locked on the sword. Do you feel it? She whispered. James nodded. Yeah. For the first time in his life, he felt complete. He wasn't just James Carter anymore. He was the last remnant of an empire that had been wiped from history. And the war was far from over. Above them, the sky split apart. A massive ancient war fleet, dormant for thousands of years, began to awaken. One by one, the great ships activated, their lights flickering to life. The galaxy had long believed that humanity was weak, that humans were nothing but a forgotten race. But they had been wrong. Humanity had never been weak. They had only been sleeping. And now, they were awake. Awakening the blade. Epic reveal. The sky above planet Sci-Fi split apart. James Carter gripped the unmovable sword, his pulse hammering. The air around him crackled with golden energy, the ruins trembling beneath his feet. The moment the blade had come free, something ancient had awakened, something far beyond the temple. High above, the massive war fleet that had once belonged to humanity began to stir from its endless slumber. Hundreds of ships, massive, sleek, built with technology no modern civilization could match, hung in orbit like silent gods. Their surfaces were etched with the same golden markings James had seen in the underground chamber. For centuries, they had remained hidden, forgotten. But now, they were waking up, and the entire galaxy was watching. James took a shaky breath. The unmovable sword, now fully in his hands, felt strange. Heavy, yet balanced. Ancient, yet alive. The blade pulsed with light, responding to his heartbeat, as if it were an extension of him. He knew, somehow, that he had changed the moment he had lifted it. This was not just a weapon. This was a crown, a key, a challenge. The galaxy had erased his people, wiped them from history, reduced them to myths. But the sword had waited, because it had always known that one day a human would return. And now, that human was him. The galaxy reacts. Across the ruins, the Drakari army stood frozen, their weapons trembling in their hands. The high priest, once so sure of his victory, was now pale and shaking. His black-scaled hands curled into claws, his eyes locked on the sword that should never have been lifted. "This is not possible," he whispered, his voice filled with terror. "The gods would never choose a human." James turned to face him, his grip tightening around the hilt. The blade pulsed once, sending a ripple of golden energy through the air. The high priest flinched. James took a slow step forward. The Drakari backed away. They were afraid of him. For centuries, they had laughed at humans, called them weak, called them small. They had treated Earth as nothing but an afterthought. But now, a human was standing where no one else could. A human had done the impossible, and the entire universe had just felt the shift. The first challenge. A sudden voice boomed across the battlefield, amplified by the ship's long-dormant systems. Identification. Co-environment. James' heart skipped a beat. The voice wasn't speaking in any known alien language. It was speaking English. Lyra's eyes widened. That's the fleet. James barely had time to process it before the voice continued. Final PROTOCOL engaged. Waiting for command. Silence. Every eye turned to James. His mouth went dry. He had no idea what to say, no idea what to do. This wasn't just an ancient artifact. This was a summoning ritual. The unmovable sword wasn't just a relic of humanity's past. It was the key to the war fleet. And now, the fleet was awaiting orders. James swallowed hard. Was he even ready for this? Before he could speak, a deep guttural laugh echoed from across the ruins. James turned sharply. The high priest had regained his composure. Though fear still flickered in his reptilian eyes, his mouth curved into a sneer. "You think this means you've won?" he growled. "You're a fool, human." James tensed. "You don't look like you're winning." The high priest snarled. "This sword, this fleet. Do you think the galaxy will just bow to you because of ancient myths? Because you found a weapon buried in the dirt?" James frowned but said nothing. The high priest took a slow step forward. His soldiers, though shaken, rallied behind him. "You don't understand the forces you've awakened," he spat. "This sword is a relic of the past, and the past is dead." He raised his clawed hand toward the sky. James' stomach dropped. Above them, new ships were arriving. Not human. Not Drakari. Something else. Something dark. James' grip tightened on the sword. "Who are they?" Lyra's face turned pale. "No." She turned to James, her voice almost shaking. "They are the Devourers." James' breath caught in his throat. The same name from the hidden chamber. The same enemy that had once erased humanity from the galaxy. And now, they were back. The shadows returned. The sky above grew dark, as if the twin suns of Sci-Fi had been swallowed. The ships that arrived were not like any known design. They were sleek, shifting in shape, their surfaces covered in black, liquid-like material that seemed to writhe and pulse like living things. And then, the first of them descended. A figure emerged from the ship's hull, stepping onto the battlefield. James' blood ran cold. It wasn't an alien. It wasn't even alive. It was a shadow, a being with no clear form, its body shifting between solid and liquid, its eyes burning a deep, unholy red. When it spoke, its voice was not a sound. It was a feeling, a vibration inside James' mind. It has begun again. James instinctively raised his sword. The devourer turned its head toward him. A moment passed. Then, slowly, it smiled. The air turned ice cold. Lyra grabbed James' arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "James," she whispered, "we're not ready for this." James knew she was right, but he also knew it didn't matter anymore. The war wasn't waiting. It had already started, and this time, humanity would not fall. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the unmovable sword in his hands. The galaxy had forgotten humanity. But soon, they would remember. The rise of the last human warrior. The battlefield was silent. James Carter stood at the center, the unmovable sword pulsing in his hands. The golden energy flowing from it crackled in the air like a living storm. Across from him, the high priest of the Drakari still looked stunned, his warriors hesitant, unsure if they should advance or retreat. But none of that mattered anymore, because the real enemy had arrived. High above, the sky of Sci-Fi was no longer blue and gold. The arrival of the Devourers had drowned the light. Their fleet, massive, black, shifting vessels, hovered like open wounds in the sky, oozing darkness that seemed to drink in the very light around them. Their ships did not reflect the stars. They swallowed them. James' fingers tightened around the sword's hilt. He could feel it humming in response, as if preparing for battle. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about his people. About a war that had never truly ended. The devourer in front of him, the shadowy figure with burning red eyes, a form shifting between solid and liquid, took a slow step forward. It did not walk. It flowed. James' stomach tightened as the air turned freezing cold. Then, without moving its mouth, the being spoke into his mind. "You are the last." James gritted his teeth, "And you are about to find out why that's a problem." The devourer tilted its head. Amusement. "We ended your kind once before." James took another step forward, the unmovable sword igniting with golden fire. "Then you didn't finish the job." For the first time, the shadow's smile faltered. And James struck. The first battle of the last war. The unmovable sword burned like a sun as it cut through the air. James swung hard, but the devourer moved like smoke, twisting away just in time. A wave of dark energy erupted from its shifting form, lashing toward James like a tidal wave. He barely dodged, rolling to the side as the ground where he stood disintegrated into black dust. The impact shook the battlefield. James landed on his feet, sword still burning in his grip. His breathing was heavy, his pulse rapid, but he wasn't backing down. The devourer tilted its head. This time, it whispered, "We will not make the same mistake." It raised one hand, and the sky screamed. From above, the devourer fleet opened its halls, and the horrors poured out. Massive, twisting creatures, some humanoid, some not, their bodies covered in shifting shadows. Their eyes burned the same unnatural red, their bodies bending in ways that defied logic. They were not ships. They were alive. James took a step back. His throat went dry. There were thousands of them, and they were all heading straight for him. The fleet awakens. Then, suddenly, a new voice boomed across the battlefield. "Defensive POR2COLs inengaged." James felt it before he saw it. A deep rumbling from above. The human war fleet, silent for 100,000 years, suddenly came to life. A low, ancient hum filled the sky. The golden warships that had been forgotten by time began to move. Engines roared to life. Shields flared, weapons primed. James felt them. Not like ships. Not like machines. Like a part of him. As if they had been waiting for him. A new holographic projection flashed across his vision, as if the fleet itself were speaking directly to him. Command recognized. Awaiting battle orders. James exhaled sharply. For the first time, he wasn't alone. The war begins. James raised the unmovable sword toward the sky. The golden light intensified, shining like a beacon against the dark fleet above. The human warships responded instantly. Massive energy turrets swung into position. Cannons, dormant for eons, powered up. James didn't need to speak. The fleet already knew what to do. The first devourer creature lunged toward him. James met it head-on. He swung the sword with all his strength, and the instant the golden blade connected with the creature's shifting form, it screamed. Not a normal sound. Not even a biological one. It was a sound of something that had never felt pain before. The moment the unmovable sword struck, the creature disintegrated. The other devourers hesitated. James took a step forward, his sword pulsing ready. He knew now. This wasn't just a weapon. It was the only thing that could kill them. The devourer fleet realized this too. And in that moment, the war truly began. The last human warrior stands. Lyra stood back, watching it unfold. The golden war fleet, long abandoned, long silent, was fully awake. James stood at the center of it all. A human, once forgotten by history, now leading the charge. The galaxy had once called humans weak. They had erased them, buried them. But now, they would learn the truth. James Carter was not just a man anymore. He was the last warrior of humanity. And he was just getting started.